The candle flame beside Lorenzo's correspondence cabinet wavers in the draught from an opening door, casting restless shadows across rows of sealed letters marked with symbols that seem to shift in the uncertain light. Each wax seal bears a different cipher, and the scent of cooling parchment mingles with the lingering traces of melted wax and ink. Somewhere in the depths of the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, a clock strikes midnight, its bronze voice echoing through corridors where the most powerful family in Florence conducts its most private affairs. I am your DrowZy historian, and tonight we slip past the public ceremonies and daylight audiences to witness the palace as it truly awakens. When the merchant visitors depart and the formal receptions conclude, when the last petitioner bows and withdraws from the great halls, the Medici palace transforms into something far more intriguing than any daytime display of wealth could suggest. These midnight hours belong to different pursuits, entirely to the careful translation of forbidden texts, to the mixing of medicines in hidden laboratories, to the encoding of messages that could reshape the balance of power across Italian city-states. The heavy wooden doors of the palace close each evening with deliberate ceremony, but this marks a beginning rather than an end. Behind those doors, past the sleeping servants and beyond the reach of casual observers, lies a world of intellectual ambition and carefully guarded experiments that would define the Renaissance itself. Listen, in the central courtyard, the night watch prepares for their change of guard. The Palazzo Medici Riccardi stands like a fortress of learning in the heart of Florence, its thick stone walls concealing chambers that few living souls have entered. The torches mounted in iron brackets along the arcade cast pools of warm light across the worn flagstones, but between these circles of illumination, deep shadows gather in the corners where private conversations unfold in whispers. Two guards approach each other across the courtyard, their footsteps measured and careful on the stone. The departing watchman carries a ring of keys that catches the torchlight. Each key opens a different door, grants access to a different level of the family's most protected spaces. His replacement nods in the practiced silence of men who understand that certain activities require absolute discretion. The exchange takes place without ceremony. A few murmured words about the evening's quiet passages, a gesture toward the upper floors where lights still flicker behind shuttered windows, and then the day guard disappears through a side entrance that leads to the servants' quarters. The new watchman begins his slow circuit of the courtyard perimeter, but his route follows a pattern that creates predictable intervals of solitude in specific areas of the palace. This timing serves a purpose. In the minutes when the guard's footsteps echo from the far side of the arcade, certain doors open quietly. Figures in dark robes move between chambers carrying bundles wrapped in silk or small wooden boxes that they handle with extraordinary care. They know exactly how long they have before the guards return, and they move with the confidence of people following a routine established over years of practice. The palace settles into what appears to be scholarly silence, but this quietude masks intense activity. Behind walls thick enough to muffle sound, behind doors secured with multiple locks, the true business of the Medici family continues through the night. The banking and trade that built their fortune requires constant attention, but so do the more delicate pursuits that sustain their power: the cultivation of philosophers and physicians, the collection of texts that other rulers would consider dangerous, the development of knowledge that could shift the foundations of European learning. What activities require such careful timing and such elaborate discretion? The answer lies deeper within the palace, past chambers that even honored guests never see. The family chapel occupies a position of prominence in the palace's public areas, its frescoed walls displaying the Medici devotion to religious orthodoxy. But behind the altar, concealed by panels that appear to be decorative stonework, lies an entrance that serves a very different purpose. The hidden spiral staircase begins here, carved from the living rock of the palace's foundation and worn smooth by centuries of careful footsteps. This passage predates the current palace structure, built during an earlier era when Florence's political landscape demanded that important families maintain multiple routes of entrance and escape. The Medici preserved and expanded these hidden ways, but they adapted them for purposes that would have surprised their original architects. Instead of providing escape routes from political enemies, these passages now grant access to the family's most precious intellectual treasures. The staircase spirals upward in a tight helix, lit at irregular intervals by small oil lamps set into niches carved in the stone walls. The flames burn with the steady consistency of wicks that receive regular attention, suggesting that this route sees frequent use. The steps themselves show patterns of wear that speak to decades of passage, but the wear appears concentrated in specific areas, the inside edge where someone climbing would naturally place their feet, the outer edge where someone descending might steady themselves against the wall. Each lamp casts its own pool of golden light, but the spaces between them remain thick with shadow. The staircase creates its own acoustic environment, muffling sounds from the chapel below while amplifying the whisper of robes against stone, the soft scratch of leather soles on worn steps. Someone climbing these stairs moves through a world suspended between the palace's public face and its most private secrets. The ascent requires patience. The stairs wind through multiple levels of the palace structure, passing behind walls that contain formal reception chambers, family living quarters, and administrative offices. At certain points, small openings in the stonework provide glimpses into these other spaces, a sliver of light from a corridor, the distant sound of voices discussing matters of trade or diplomacy. But the staircase continues upward, leading to chambers that exist entirely separate from the palace's official functions. Where does this secretive passage lead? The answer emerges as the staircase finally terminates at a landing faced with a door of unusual construction. The wood appears ancient, darkened by age and oil from countless hands, but the iron fittings show the craftsmanship of the finest Florentine metal workers. Multiple locks secure this entrance, and the keys required to open them hang from no guard's ring. Only members of the immediate family possess access to what lies beyond. The door opens onto Cosimo's private biblioteca, a chamber that represents one of the most significant collections of Greek and Latin manuscripts in all of Europe. This room exists as a world unto itself, lined from floor to ceiling with wooden shelves that hold treasures beyond the calculation of mere gold. But these are not books in the modern sense, they are handwritten manuscripts, each one copied by scribes whose skill represented the difference between preservation and loss of ancient knowledge. The biblioteca observes the medieval tradition of chained libraries, where the most precious volumes remain secured to their reading desks by lengths of iron chain. Each chain allows sufficient movement for a scholar to open and read the text, but prevents the removal of manuscripts from their designated positions. The system reflects both the immense value of these works and the very real danger of their disappearance into the collections of rival families or foreign courts. The chains themselves tell stories. Some show the bright polish of frequent handling, indicating texts that scholars consult regularly. Others bear the patina of age, suggesting manuscripts that remain undisturbed for months at a time, waiting for readers with the specialized knowledge required to unlock their contents. The variety of chain lengths reflects the different sizes of the volume's massive theological works requiring heavy iron links, delicate poetry collections secured with chains of almost jewelry-like fineness. But tonight, attention focuses on a particular section of the biblioteca where the newest acquisitions rest on specially constructed reading stands. These manuscripts arrived in Florence through channels that required extraordinary discretion and expense. They represent texts rescued from Constantinople during the city's final years under Byzantine rule, carried westward by scholars who understood that Islamic conquest would scatter or destroy libraries that had preserved classical learning for over 1,000 years. The process of acquiring these manuscripts involved negotiations that extended across multiple courts and required the Medici to call upon every diplomatic connection they had cultivated over decades of banking and trade. Each text represents not just intellectual treasure, but political risk. Possession of certain works could be interpreted as evidence of dangerous sympathies or heterodox beliefs. The Medici collected them anyway, understanding that the preservation of ancient learning justified almost any risk. What treasures required such protective measures? The answer lies in the nature of the texts themselves and the circumstances of their acquisition. These are not merely copies of well-known classical works, but manuscripts that preserve variants, commentaries, and complete texts that exist nowhere else in the Western world. They include mathematical treatises that advance beyond the knowledge available in European universities, philosophical works that challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between reason and faith, and scientific observations that could revolutionize understanding of the natural world. Some of these manuscripts bear marginalia in multiple hands, showing the accumulated wisdom of Byzantine scholars who studied and commented on the texts across generations. Others contain diagrams and illustrations that demonstrate practical applications of theoretical knowledge, architectural principles, mechanical devices, medical procedures that European physicians have not yet encountered. The Medici understood that possessing these works granted them access to intellectual resources that could provide decisive advantages in everything from military engineering to international diplomacy. But the true significance of the collection extends beyond its immediate practical applications. These manuscripts represent continuity with the classical world that the Renaissance sought to recover and surpass. They provide direct access to ancient Greek thought in forms that had been filtered through Islamic scholarship and Byzantine preservation. For scholars like Marsilio Ficino, who devoted their lives to reconciling classical philosophy with Christian theology, these texts offered resources that could reshape European intellectual life. The Bibliotheca maintains an atmosphere of reverent concentration even in the depths of night. The air carries the scent of aged parchment and vellum, mingled with traces of the various inks used by scribes across centuries: iron gall ink from medieval scriptoriums, carbon-based inks from ancient Alexandria, exotic pigments used to illuminate capital letters and marginal decorations. These scents create an olfactory map of the manuscript's origins and ages, detectable to anyone who spends sufficient time among the collections. Candlelight provides the only illumination, but the candles themselves reflect careful consideration of the bibliotheca's needs. They burn with steady flames that produce minimal smoke, protecting the manuscripts from damage while providing sufficient light for detailed reading. The candle holders incorporate reflective surfaces that amplify and direct the light, creating focused pools of illumination around each reading desk while leaving the rest of the chamber in protective dimness. In one corner of the bibliotheca, separated from the main collection by a low wooden barrier, stands a reading desk that shows signs of intensive recent use. Scattered across its surface lie Greek manuscripts open to pages covered with dense philosophical text, accompanied by sheets of paper bearing notes written in multiple hands and languages. This workspace belongs to Marsilio Ficino, the scholar whom Cosimo de' Medici sponsored to undertake one of the most ambitious intellectual projects of the Renaissance, the translation of Plato's complete works into Latin. Ficino works by candlelight, his quill moving across paper with the careful precision of someone who understands that each word choice carries philosophical implications. The manuscript before him contains Plato's dialogues in their original Greek, but this is not merely a translation exercise. Ficino seeks to reconcile Platonic philosophy with Christian theology, to demonstrate that ancient wisdom and revealed religion point toward the same fundamental truths about the nature of reality and the human soul. The work requires extraordinary care. Each Greek term must be examined for its full range of meanings. Each philosophical concept must be rendered in Latin that preserves both intellectual precision and theological orthodoxy. Ficino consults multiple sources as he works earlier Latin translations that provide precedents for specific choices, theological commentaries that clarify acceptable interpretations, and his own extensive notes accumulated over years of study. The process advances slowly, sometimes requiring hours of consideration for a single passage. But the translation work represents only one aspect of Ficino's midnight activities. Spread across a secondary table lie manuscripts that explore more controversial territory, hermetic texts that claim to preserve ancient Egyptian wisdom, astrological treatises that correlate celestial movements with terrestrial events, and alchemical works that promise to reveal the fundamental principles governing the transformation of matter. These texts exist in a gray area between legitimate natural philosophy and dangerous heterodoxy, requiring the most careful handling. Why does this translation work require such secrecy? The answer lies in the complex relationship between classical learning and Christian doctrine that characterized Renaissance intellectual life. While the Church officially endorsed the recovery of ancient wisdom, certain classical texts contained ideas that could be interpreted as challenging fundamental Christian teachings. Plato's theories about the soul, for example, suggested possibilities for reincarnation that contradicted Christian beliefs about individual resurrection. His political philosophy proposed forms of government that might undermine established authority. Ficino's approach involved finding interpretations that preserved the value of classical learning while avoiding direct conflict with religious orthodoxy. This required sophisticated theological reasoning and extensive consultation with church authorities, but it also demanded discretion during the development process. Ideas that might prove acceptable in their final, refined form could appear dangerous or heretical during the exploratory phases of translation and commentary. The midnight hours provide the privacy necessary for this delicate work. During daylight, Ficino must attend to his duties as a priest and maintain his public role as a respectable scholar. But in the quiet of the biblioteca, surrounded by texts that few other Europeans have even seen, he can explore the full implications of classical philosophy without concern for immediate judgment or misinterpretation. His workspace reflects the complexity of his task. Multiple dictionaries help him navigate between Greek, Latin, and vernacular Italian. Theological references provide guidance on acceptable interpretations of potentially controversial concepts. Mathematical and astronomical texts support his efforts to understand Plato's references to numerical relationships and celestial harmonies. The accumulated resources represent decades of careful collection and represent a research library that rivals those of major universities. But Ficino's work extends beyond translation into original philosophical synthesis. His notes reveal attempts to develop a comprehensive system that would demonstrate the fundamental compatibility between Platonic philosophy, Christian theology, and the emerging natural philosophy of the Renaissance. This ambitious project required him to master multiple intellectual traditions and to find creative solutions to apparent contradictions between different sources of authority. The candle flame beside his desk burns with unusual steadiness, suggesting that the biblioteca maintains careful environmental controls to protect both manuscripts and scholars. The air circulation prevents the accumulation of smoke and moisture that could damage ancient parchments, while the temperature remains constant enough to allow for extended periods of concentrated work. These conditions reflect the Medici understanding that intellectual pursuits require material support as sophisticated as any other form of patronage. As Ficino pauses in his translation work, his attention turns to correspondence that requires equal discretion. The Medici maintain extensive networks of communication with scholars, diplomats, and merchants across Europe and beyond, but certain categories of information demand special handling. Letters discussing the acquisition of controversial manuscripts, reports on political developments that could affect trade routes, and philosophical exchanges that touch on sensitive theological questions all require encoding systems that protect both senders and recipients. The transition from Ficino's scholarly alcove to Lorenzo's diplomatic writing chamber involves passage through connecting rooms that serve as buffer zones between different types of sensitive activity. These intermediate spaces contain their own collections of specialized materials maps that show trade routes and political boundaries with precision unavailable in public sources, genealogical charts that trace the complex relationships between European ruling families, and financial records that document the flow of Medici resources across international networks. Lorenzo's writing chamber represents the intersection of intellectual and political power that characterized Medici influence during the Renaissance. The room combines the resources necessary for sophisticated diplomatic correspondence with the tools required for the most advanced cryptographic practices of the era. Multiple writing desks accommodate different types of communication, while specialized storage systems organize the various codes and ciphers used for correspondence with different courts and individuals. The chamber's organization reflects the complexity of Renaissance diplomacy, where information itself represented a form of currency that could determine the success or failure of political alliances, trade negotiations, and military campaigns. Lorenzo understood that maintaining accurate intelligence networks and secure communication systems provided advantages that could prove more valuable than traditional military or economic resources. The cipher systems employed by the Medici evolved from techniques developed by Italian merchants and diplomats over several centuries of international competition. These methods ranged from simple letter substitution codes that could protect routine commercial information to elaborate polyalphabetic systems that rendered messages virtually unbreakable without access to specific keys and procedures. The choice of cipher system depended on the sensitivity of the information being transmitted and the sophistication of potential interceptors. What messages demanded such elaborate encryption? The correspondence files reveal the extraordinary range of information that the Medici considered worthy of protection. Commercial intelligence about crop yields, mining production, and manufacturing innovations could provide decisive advantages in international markets. Political intelligence about succession disputes, military preparations, and diplomatic negotiations could enable the Medici to position themselves favorably in conflicts that would reshape European power structures. But perhaps most significantly, the encoded correspondence includes exchanges about intellectual matters that carried political implications. Letters discussing the acquisition of specific manuscripts, the progress of translation projects, and the development of new philosophical or scientific theories required protection, because knowledge itself represented a form of power that rival courts sought to control or suppress. The Medici understood that their patronage of learning created both opportunities and vulnerabilities that demanded careful management. The physical tools of cryptography fill multiple cabinets within the chamber. Cipher wheels allow for the mechanical generation of complex substitution patterns. Code books provide standardized systems for converting common words and phrases into numerical or alphabetical equivalents. Invisible inks made from various chemical compounds enable the concealment of sensitive information within apparently innocent correspondence. Each system requires specialized knowledge and materials that place secure communication beyond the reach of casual observers or opportunistic interceptors. The preparation of encoded messages involves elaborate procedures designed to protect both the content and the methods used for encryption. Multiple copies of important communications ensure against loss during transmission, but these copies employ different cipher systems to prevent the compromise of any single encoding method. False messages using broken or outdated codes provide disinformation to potential interceptors while protecting the security of current communication systems. Lorenzo's personal involvement in these cryptographic activities reflects the central importance of information control in Medici strategy. Unlike many Renaissance rulers who delegated such technical matters to subordinates, Lorenzo maintained direct oversight of the most sensitive correspondence and personally supervised the development of new encoding systems. His mathematical education and philosophical training provided the intellectual foundation necessary for understanding the theoretical principles underlying effective cryptography. The chamber maintains supplies of specialized materials required for secure correspondence. Different types of paper and parchment provide varying levels of security and prestige appropriate for different recipients. Multiple varieties of ink allow for the creation of messages that become visible only under specific conditions or that fade after predetermined periods. Wax for seals comes from sources that provide unique colors and textures that help recipients verify the authenticity of communications. The sealing process itself incorporates multiple layers of security designed to detect tampering and verify authenticity. Personal seal rings create impressions that require specific knowledge to forge successfully. Hidden marks within the wax patterns provide additional verification methods known only to regular correspondents. The positioning and orientation of seals follow codes that convey preliminary information about the message contents and urgency. As the night deepens, the activities within these hidden chambers of the Palazzo Medici Riccardi continue with the steady intensity of work that cannot be interrupted by ordinary considerations of time or convenience. The scholars, diplomats, and family members who pursue their various projects understand that they participate in enterprises that will shape the future of European civilization, but they also recognize that their immediate safety depends on maintaining the discretion that protects both their methods and their goals. The palace around them sleeps, but this sleep provides the cover necessary for activities that require absolute concentration and complete security. In the morning, when the public functions of the palace resume and the merchant visitors return, these midnight pursuits will fade into the background of routine administration and social ceremony. but their influence will permeate every aspect of Medici power, providing the knowledge, connections, and strategic advantages that enable a banking family to become the unofficial rulers of Renaissance Florence. A single candle flame wavers beside a heavy Flemish tapestry, its light catching the metallic threads woven through hunting scenes and mythological figures. Behind this magnificent wall hanging, something shifts, not the tapestry itself, but the stone beyond it. Your DrowZy historian has followed the quiet footsteps of palace servants through corridors where even the shadows seem to hold their breath, and now we discover what lies beyond the boundaries of ordinary palace architecture. The tapestry depicts Diana and her hounds pursuing a golden stag through an enchanted forest, but tonight it serves a more practical purpose. A servant's practiced hand finds the concealed mechanism that allows the heavy fabric to swing aside, revealing not solid stone but a narrow doorway cut into the palace wall. The opening stands just wide enough for a single person, its edges worn smooth by decades of careful passage. This threshold marks the boundary between the public magnificence of the Medici palace and the private workshops that support its intellectual ambitions. Beyond this concealed entrance, the documented patronage of Renaissance Florence gives way to the quieter pursuits that required both secrecy and substantial investment. The air that drifts through this doorway carries scents that would puzzle most visitors to the palace. Metallic notes of heated copper, the sharp sweetness of distilled spirits, and something else entirely, something that suggests materials gathered from distant ports and mountain valleys. The servant who operates this hidden mechanism moves with the efficiency of long practice, but also with the careful attention of someone who understands that discretion protects not only the privacy of these activities, but also their safety. The knowledge pursued beyond this threshold requires isolation from the political pressures and commercial interests that influence every other aspect of palace life. Here, in spaces that appear on no architectural plans and receive no mention in diplomatic correspondence, the true foundation of Medici power takes its most tangible form. The stone steps that descend from this concealed entrance show the wear patterns of regular use, but they also display the careful maintenance that prevents any sound from echoing through the palace walls above. Each step has been shaped to accommodate silent movement, and the walls themselves have been lined with materials that absorb rather than amplify the sounds of human activity. This passage was designed by architects who understood that the most valuable knowledge requires the most complete protection. As we follow this descending path, the palace above us continues its quiet midnight routines, but the air grows cooler and carries increasingly complex scents. The servants who navigate these passages carry no torches that might attract attention, relying instead on their intimate knowledge of every stone and turning. They move through this hidden geography with the confidence of people who have spent years learning its secrets, but also with the reverence of those who understand that they serve purposes larger than their individual comprehension. The passage opens into a chamber that exists in complete opposition to the ornate public spaces of the palace above. Here, function determines every aspect of design, and beauty emerges from the elegant efficiency of carefully planned workspace rather than from decorative display. The walls are lined with stone that has been selected for its ability to maintain consistent temperature and humidity, creating an environment where delicate processes can proceed without interference from the seasonal variations that affect the rest of the palace. Along these walls, shelves support an array of glass vessels that catch and reflect the minimal light with crystalline precision. These are not the decorative glassware that adorns the palace dining halls, but working instruments designed for specific technical purposes. Alembics for distillation rise in graceful curves that serve both aesthetic and practical functions. their shapes determined by centuries of experimentation with the physics of vapor and condensation. Retorts for heating substances display the mathematical precision that Renaissance artisans brought to every aspect of their craft. The central workspace of this chamber centers around a stone furnace whose design reflects deep understanding of controlled heat application. This is not the massive fireplace that might warm a palace hall, but a carefully engineered apparatus that can maintain precise temperatures for extended periods. Its construction required materials selected not only for their resistance to heat, but also for their ability to distribute warmth evenly and predictably. The craftsmen who built this furnace understood that the processes it would support demanded consistency that no ordinary fire could provide. Surrounding this furnace, copper vessels of various sizes await their turn in processes that might continue for days or weeks. These containers show the subtle discoloration that results from repeated heating and cooling, evidence of regular use in activities that require both patience and precision. Their surfaces have been polished to prevent contamination, but they also display the small marks that accumulate when instruments serve practical rather than ceremonial purposes. The air in this chamber carries the complex aroma of substances that have been heated, cooled, combined, and separated according to methods that represent the accumulated knowledge of generations. Some of these scents suggest familiar materials: the metallic sharpness of heated silver, the organic sweetness of plant extracts, the mineral clarity of purified salts. But other aromas hint at materials that most people of this era would never encounter. Substances that arrive in Florence through trade networks that connect the Medici banking operations to the most distant corners of the known world. Against one wall, bundles of dried plants hang in careful arrangements that suggest both practical storage and systematic classification. These are not the common herbs that might supply a palace kitchen, but specimens that have been selected for properties that require specialized knowledge to understand and employ. Some display the familiar characteristics of European medicinal plants, but others show the exotic qualities of materials that have traveled from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Their preservation requires techniques that protect not only their physical integrity, but also the volatile compounds that make them valuable. The documentation of activities in this chamber follows systems that reflect the same attention to detail that characterizes Medici banking records. Ledgers bound in fine leather record not only the materials used in various processes, but also the precise conditions under which these processes were conducted. These records serve multiple purposes. They preserve successful techniques for future use, they document the costs associated with various experiments, and they provide the systematic knowledge that transforms individual discoveries into reliable methods. But these ledgers also reveal the international scope of the activities they document. Entries record materials acquired through Medici banking connections in London, Bruges, and Constantinople. They note the arrival of specimens collected by agents traveling through territories that most Europeans knew only through rumors and legends. They track the costs not only of exotic materials, but also of the specialized knowledge required to employ these materials effectively. The people who work in this chamber move with the quiet confidence of those who understand that their activities contribute to enterprises that extend far beyond the boundaries of Florence or even Italy. They prepare materials that will support diplomatic negotiations, commercial ventures, and scholarly investigations throughout Europe. They develop techniques that will influence everything from the preservation of manuscripts to the treatment of diseases that affect both palace residents and the broader population of the city. Their work requires not only technical skill, but also the discretion that protects both their methods and their results from those who might use such knowledge for purposes that conflict with Medici interests. The substances they refine and the techniques they develop represent forms of power that could shift the balance of European politics if they fell into the wrong hands. The secrecy that surrounds their activities serves not only their immediate safety, but also the broader stability of the alliances and agreements that maintain Florence's independence. As we move through this underground workshop, the sounds from the palace above fade into complete silence, replaced by the gentle bubbling of distillation apparatus and the soft whisper of carefully controlled flames. These sounds create their own rhythm, marking the progress of processes that cannot be hurried or interrupted. The people who tend these instruments understand that their work operates according to natural laws that respect no human schedule, requiring patience that might extend through multiple nights of careful attention. The chamber connects to other spaces through passages that suggest the full extent of the hidden architecture that supports Medici power. One corridor leads toward what appears to be a carefully controlled environment for growing plants that require protection from Florence's variable climate. Another passage descends further into the foundations of the palace, suggesting chambers that serve purposes too sensitive even for this secluded workshop. But our attention focuses on a smaller doorway that opens onto a stone staircase leading upward, toward what might be another concealed entrance or perhaps access to chambers that serve different aspects of the same enterprise. The air that flows through this doorway carries the green scents of growing things, suggesting spaces where the botanical materials processed in this laboratory are cultivated and harvested according to methods that ensure both quality and secrecy. This staircase emerges into an enclosed courtyard that exists in complete contrast to the underground chambers we have just explored. Here, moonlight illuminates raised beds arranged in geometric patterns that reflect both practical efficiency and aesthetic harmony. This is not the ornamental garden that palace visitors might admire during daylight hours, but a working space designed to support the systematic cultivation of plants that require specialized knowledge and careful attention. The layout of these beds follows principles that optimize both growing conditions and security. Each section is designed to support plants with similar requirements for soil, water, and exposure to light, but the arrangement also ensures that the most sensitive specimens remain hidden from casual observation, protected by more common plants that would not attract the attention of anyone who might accidentally gain access to this space. The plants themselves tell the story of trade networks that connect Florence to regions that most Europeans know only through the accounts of merchants and diplomats. Some beds contain familiar European medicinal herbs, chamomile for digestive ailments, lavender for nervous conditions, rue for various women's complaints, but other sections display specimens that have traveled from much greater distances, plants whose cultivation in Florence's climate requires techniques that represent significant innovations in agricultural practice. The person who tends this garden moves through the moonlit pathways with the quiet efficiency of someone who understands that each plant requires individual attention. This is Giovanni, the family physician whose knowledge extends far beyond the conventional medical practice of his era. His understanding of plant properties combines the inherited wisdom of European herbalism with information gathered through Medici trade connections from Arabic, Greek, and even more distant sources. Giovanni's work in this garden represents one aspect of the systematic approach to knowledge that characterizes all Medici enterprises. He does not simply collect plants that have traditional uses, but experiments with growing conditions, harvesting techniques, and preparation methods that might enhance their effectiveness. His records document not only which plants thrive in Florence's climate, but also how various cultivation practices affect the concentration of the compounds that make these plants medically valuable. Some of the specimens in this garden require attention that can only be provided during nighttime hours. Certain flowers open only in darkness, releasing fragrances that must be captured at precisely the right moment. Other plants produce their most potent compounds during specific phases of their growth cycle, requiring observation and harvesting that cannot wait for convenient daylight hours. The tools Giovanni uses reflect the same attention to precision that characterizes all aspects of Medici operations. His cutting implements are designed to harvest plant materials without damaging the compounds that make them valuable. His collection containers are selected to preserve the freshness and potency of specimens that might deteriorate rapidly if exposed to light or air. His measuring devices ensure that preparations contain precisely the proportions of various ingredients that his experiments have proven most effective. But Giovanni's work extends beyond the immediate medical needs of the palace residents. The plants he cultivates and the preparations he develops serve the broader network of Medici interests throughout Europe. Diplomatic gifts might include rare medicinal compounds that demonstrate both the sophistication of Florentine knowledge and the extent of Medici trade connections. Commercial ventures might depend on access to substances that treat ailments affecting workers in distant banking operations or manufacturing enterprises. The documentation of Giovanni's work follows the same systematic principles that govern all Medici record-keeping. His journals record not only which treatments prove effective for various conditions, but also the precise methods required to prepare and administer these treatments. These records serve multiple purposes. They preserve successful techniques for future use, they document the costs and benefits of various approaches, and they provide the systematic knowledge that enables other physicians throughout the Medici network to employ these methods effectively. From this moonlit garden, another passage leads back into the palace interior, but not to the public spaces where diplomatic and commercial activities take place. Instead, this corridor provides access to workshops where different aspects of the same systematic approach to knowledge take their own specialized forms. The air that flows through this passage carries the mineral scents of ground pigments and the organic aromas of binding agents, suggesting spaces where artistic creation serves purposes that extend far beyond mere decoration. The workshop we enter next exists to support one of the most sophisticated aspects of Renaissance culture, the creation of illuminated manuscripts that preserve and transmit knowledge across generations and continents. But this is not the scriptorium where monks might copy religious texts, nor the commercial workshop where artisans produce books for wealthy collectors. This space serves the specific needs of Medici diplomatic and scholarly enterprises, creating documents that must meet standards of both artistic excellence and practical durability. The central workspace of this chamber centers around grinding stones that transform raw minerals into pigments of extraordinary purity and consistency. These stones have been selected and shaped according to techniques that represent centuries of experimentation with the physics of particle reduction. Their surfaces must be hard enough to pulverize the most resistant materials, but smooth enough to produce pigments of uniform fineness. The craftsmen who operate these stones understand that the quality of their work determines not only the beauty of the finished manuscripts, but also their ability to survive the handling and travel that diplomatic documents must endure. The materials processed in this workshop arrive through the same trade networks that supply the alchemical laboratory and medicinal garden. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan provides the intense blue that symbolizes both divine authority and earthly power in religious and secular manuscripts. Cinnabar from Spain yields the brilliant red that commands attention in diplomatic correspondence and commercial agreements. Gold leaf hammered to impossible thinness transforms ordinary text into declarations of wealth and sophistication that reinforce Medici prestige throughout Europe. But the most valuable pigments processed in this workshop come from sources that require not only substantial financial investment, but also specialized knowledge of preparation techniques. True purple requires murex shells collected from Mediterranean waters according to methods that have remained unchanged since classical antiquity. The most intense blacks demand carbon prepared from specific organic materials burned under carefully controlled conditions. These colors represent not only artistic choices, but also political statements about the resources and expertise that support Medici operations. The artisans who work in this chamber possess skills that combine technical precision with aesthetic sensitivity. They understand not only how to prepare pigments of consistent quality, but also how to select colors that will reinforce the intended impact of various documents. A diplomatic letter might employ pigments that subtly reference the recipient's cultural preferences or political allegiances. A commercial agreement might use colors that suggest the exotic materials and distant territories that Medici trade networks can access. Their work also requires understanding of the symbolic systems that govern Renaissance communication. Certain colors carry meanings that transcend their immediate visual impact, referencing classical authorities, religious traditions, or contemporary political alliances. The choice of pigments for a particular document might communicate information that supplements or even contradicts the explicit content of the text itself. The workshop connects to adjacent chambers through openings that suggest the integrated nature of all these midnight activities. One passage leads to spaces where completed manuscripts are stored under conditions that protect them from the deterioration that threatens all organic materials. Another corridor provides access to chambers where the parchment and paper that support these illuminated texts are prepared and treated according to methods that ensure their longevity and resistance to various forms of damage. But our path leads upward through a spiral staircase that climbs toward the highest levels of the palace. The air that flows down this stairway carries the cool freshness of night breezes and the complex sense of materials that serve purposes quite different from those we have encountered in the lower chambers. These aromas suggest metals polished to mirror brightness, oils refined for optical clarity, and substances that have been processed to eliminate any impurities that might interfere with precise measurement or calculation. The chamber we reach at the top of this climb exists to support activities that represent one of the most sophisticated aspects of Renaissance intellectual life, the systematic observation and mathematical analysis of celestial phenomena. This is Lorenzo's astronomical study, a space designed to combine the practical requirements of observational astronomy with the symbolic importance of astrological calculation in Renaissance diplomacy and commerce. The room centers around instruments that represent the highest achievements of Renaissance precision craftsmanship. An astrolabe crafted by the finest metalworkers in Florence displays the mathematical relationships between celestial and terrestrial coordinates with accuracy that enables navigation across vast oceanic distances. Armillary spheres constructed according to the most recent astronomical theories provide three-dimensional models of planetary motions that inform both scientific investigation and practical prediction. The walls of this chamber display star charts that combine observational accuracy with artistic sophistication. These are not the decorative maps that might ornament a wealthy collector's library, but working documents that record the precise positions of celestial objects over extended periods of time. Their creation requires not only mathematical skill, but also access to observational data gathered from multiple locations throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. Lorenzo's work in this chamber serves multiple aspects of Medici operations. The astronomical calculations that guide navigation enable Medici banking agents to travel between European cities with unprecedented efficiency and safety. The astrological analyses that predict favorable timing for various enterprises help coordinate diplomatic negotiations, commercial ventures, and financial investments across distances that make conventional communications slow and unreliable. But the most sensitive applications of Lorenzo's astronomical work remain hidden even from most palace residents. Certain diplomatic negotiations depend on timing that reflects not only political convenience, but also symbolic significance that resonates with the cultural expectations of various European courts. Commercial agreements might incorporate terms that reference celestial events in ways that strengthen their legal and symbolic authority. The instruments Lorenzo employs in this work represent substantial investments in both materials and expertise. The bronze components of his astrolabe require alloys that maintain dimensional stability across temperature variations that could affect measurement accuracy. The glass elements of his optical devices demand clarity and precision that push the boundaries of Renaissance glassmaking techniques. The mechanical components that enable precise adjustment of various instruments require craftsmanship that combines artistic sensitivity with engineering expertise. From this elevated chamber, windows provide access to observations that would be impossible at ground level. But these openings also connect Lorenzo's work to the broader network of astronomical observation that supports Medici operations throughout Europe. His calculations can be compared with observations made by colleagues in other cities, enabling collaborative research that transcends the political boundaries that limit most Renaissance intellectual enterprises. The documentation of Lorenzo's astronomical work follows the same systematic principles that characterize all Medici enterprises, but it also incorporates security measures that protect information which could affect the timing and success of diplomatic and commercial ventures. His records preserve not only the mathematical details of various calculations, but also the practical applications that make this information valuable for specific operations. The chamber connects to other spaces through passages that suggest the integrated nature of all these midnight activities, but it also provides access to chambers that serve the administrative functions that coordinate these various enterprises. One corridor leads to spaces where the commercial implications of astronomical calculations are translated into practical guidance for Medici banking operations throughout Europe. Our path leads downward now, through passages that return us to chambers closer to the main levels of the palace, but still isolated from the public spaces where diplomatic and social activities take place during daylight hours. The air in these corridors carries the distinctive aromas of materials that serve the commercial foundations of all Medici power, the spices, metals, and exotic substances that travel through trade networks connecting Florence to the most distant regions of the known world. The chamber we enter serves as the administrative center for tracking and coordinating the movement of materials that support all the activities we have encountered during our midnight exploration. Here, Ledgers bound in the finest leather record not only the financial details of various transactions, but also the practical information that enables Giovanni to obtain rare medicinal plants, the pigment workshop to access exotic minerals, and Lorenzo to acquire the precision instruments that support his astronomical work. The merchant records maintained in this chamber reveal the true scope of Medici operations and the sophisticated logistics required to support their various enterprises. Entries document the arrival of lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cinnabar from Spain, rare herbs from territories that most Europeans know only through legends. They track the costs not only of these materials themselves, but also of the transportation, storage, and security measures that ensure their safe delivery to Florence. But these ledgers also preserve information that extends far beyond simple commercial transactions. They record the political conditions that affect various trade routes, the seasonal variations that influence the availability of different materials, and the personal relationships that enable access to suppliers who serve no other European customers. This information provides the foundation for strategic planning that extends months or even years into the future. The person who maintains these records understands that their work supports enterprises that shape the future of European civilization, but they also recognize that their immediate responsibility involves ensuring the practical success of operations that depend on precise timing and absolute reliability. The materials they track enable diplomatic negotiations that could shift the balance of European power, commercial ventures that could establish new trade routes, and scholarly investigations that could transform human understanding of the natural world. A single candle gutters beside a locked cabinet filled with shells, crystals, and ancient coins. The flame steadies as footsteps approach through the darkened corridors of the Medici Palace, where Lorenzo's private collection awaits inspection in the hours when curious eyes cannot observe the assembly of wonders gathered from across the known world. The cabinet stands in a room designed for contemplation rather than display. Its contents represent decades of careful acquisition through networks that span from the Baltic amber routes to the spice markets of Alexandria. Each object carries documentation that traces its journey to Florence, though the stories behind these acquisitions often involve negotiations conducted through intermediaries whose names appear in no public records. Lorenzo himself selected many of these pieces during private audiences with merchants who understood that certain items required discretion in their handling. A nautilus shell from the Indian Ocean rests beside a piece of meteoric iron that fell in the German territories 3 decades earlier. The combination suggests systematic collecting rather than random accumulation, though the organizing principles remain visible only to those familiar with contemporary theories about the correspondence between earthly and celestial phenomena. The shells demonstrate particular attention to mathematical properties that fascinate scholars investigating natural geometry. Their spiral patterns provide physical evidence for theories about proportional relationships that govern both artistic composition and astronomical calculations. The crystals serve similar purposes, offering examples of geometric regularity that emerges from apparently random natural processes. Ancient coins occupy their own section within the cabinet, selected not for their monetary value but for their historical significance and artistic merit. Roman pieces bear portraits of emperors whose biographies Lorenzo studies as part of his investigation into the relationship between personal character and political effectiveness. Greek coins display symbols that connect to philosophical traditions being revived through the palace's scholarly activities. Small sculptures represent artistic traditions from regions that maintain limited contact with Florence. A carved jade figure suggests connections to traders who operate along routes that extend beyond the Mediterranean world. Its placement beside a bronze piece from Alexandria indicates systematic effort to understand artistic development across different cultural contexts. The documentation accompanying each piece reveals the complexity of acquisition networks that operate largely outside official diplomatic channels. Bills of sale reference payments made through banking arrangements that involve multiple intermediaries, while letters of provenance trace ownership histories that span several generations. This careful record-keeping serves practical purposes related to authentication, but it also provides information about cultural exchange patterns that influence contemporary artistic and intellectual development. The room containing this collection connects to other spaces where scholars examine individual pieces using methods developed specifically for investigating material evidence. Magnifying lenses enable detailed study of surface textures and construction techniques, while scales provide precise measurements that support comparative analysis. The work conducted here contributes to broader investigations into the relationship between material culture and intellectual tradition. Adjacent to the collection room, a scriptorium maintains the delicate work of manuscript illumination during hours when natural light cannot interfere with color perception. The illuminator's bench holds projects that require weeks of careful attention, as philosophical texts receive decorative elements designed to enhance rather than distract from their intellectual content. The current project involves a treatise on natural philosophy that will join the palace library once its decoration reaches completion. Each page requires individual consideration, as the illuminator must understand the text sufficiently to create images that clarify rather than contradict the author's arguments. This demands familiarity with contemporary philosophical debates as well as traditional artistic techniques. Gold leaf application proceeds according to methods developed over centuries of manuscript production, though the specific designs reflect contemporary aesthetic preferences influenced by classical sources. The illuminator works from sketches that receive approval from scholars familiar with the text, ensuring that visual elements support the intended interpretation of complex philosophical concepts. The magnifying lens positioned above the work surface enables precision that would be impossible under normal viewing conditions. Individual brush strokes must align with mathematical precision, as even small irregularities become visible when pages undergo close examination by readers who expect perfection in materials produced under Medici patronage. The pigments used in this work arrive through the same acquisition networks that supply materials for other palace activities. Ultramarine from Afghanistan provides blue tones that remain stable over decades, while vermilion from Spain offers red shades that complement rather than compete with gold accents. The cost of these materials exceeds the annual income of most Florentine families, but their use demonstrates commitment to producing works that will serve scholarly purposes for generations. The workspace maintains supplies sufficient for months of continuous work, as interruptions in material availability could delay completion of projects that support time-sensitive scholarly investigations. Brushes receive daily maintenance to ensure consistent performance, while grinding stones enable fresh pigment preparation that maintains color intensity throughout extended projects. The illuminator coordinates with other palace workshops to ensure that binding, paper preparation, and text copying proceed according to schedules that minimize delays in project completion. This coordination requires understanding of workflows that involve multiple specialized craftsmen, each working according to standards that reflect the palace's reputation for supporting scholarship of exceptional quality. In the laboratory's apothecary corner, glass distillation apparatus processes rose petals according to methods that concentrate healing properties, while preserving aromatic qualities essential for both medicinal and cosmetic applications. The distillation proceeds slowly, as excessive heat would damage the delicate compounds that provide therapeutic benefits documented in classical sources. The roses selected for this process grow in palace gardens according to cultivation methods designed to maximize the concentration of beneficial essences. Harvest timing depends on weather conditions that affect oil content, while processing must begin immediately after collection to prevent deterioration that would reduce the quality of the final product. The glass apparatus itself represents significant investment in equipment designed specifically for this type of extraction work. Each component requires individual manufacture by craftsmen familiar with the precise specifications necessary for effective distillation. The connections between vessels must maintain perfect seals while allowing for thermal expansion that occurs during heating cycles. Temperature control demands constant attention, as the flame beneath the apparatus must provide sufficient heat to generate vapor without reaching levels that would destroy the compounds being concentrated. The operator monitors both the rate of vapor production and the clarity of the collected liquid, making adjustments that ensure optimal extraction while preventing contamination that would compromise the final product's purity. The collected rose water serves multiple purposes within the palace's domestic and medicinal operations. Medical applications include treatments for eye conditions and digestive disorders that affect both family members and household staff. Cosmetic uses involve preparations that maintain skin health according to contemporary understanding of the relationship between external appearance and internal well-being. The documentation of this process includes detailed records of material quantities, processing times, and quality assessments that enable consistent reproduction of successful preparations. These records also track seasonal variations in raw material quality, providing information that supports planning for future production cycles. The storage of finished products requires containers that prevent contamination while preserving potency over extended periods. Glass vessels receive careful cleaning according to procedures that eliminate residues from previous uses, while cork stoppers undergo treatment that prevents the introduction of foreign substances that could affect product stability. In the restoration workshop adjacent to the library, scholars work to preserve Greek manuscripts rescued from Constantinople following the city's fall to Ottoman forces. These texts represent knowledge that might otherwise disappear entirely, as many similar works were lost during the conquest's disruption of established scholarly institutions. The restoration work requires techniques developed specifically for handling parchment that has suffered damage from improper storage, humidity exposure, or physical handling by individuals unfamiliar with proper manuscript care procedures. Each page receives individual assessment to determine the most appropriate conservation methods, as different types of damage require different treatment approaches. The tools used in this work include specialized brushes for cleaning surface dirt, adhesives formulated to repair tears without causing long-term damage, and protective materials that prevent further deterioration during handling. The workspace maintains environmental conditions that minimize additional stress on materials already weakened by age and previous damage. The Greek texts being restored include works on mathematics, natural philosophy, and classical literature that were unavailable in Western Europe before the recent arrival of refugee scholars from Byzantine territories. Their preservation enables comparative studies that could reveal differences between Eastern and Western intellectual traditions that developed during centuries of limited contact between these regions. The scholars conducting this work possess language skills necessary for reading texts that use terminology and references unfamiliar to contemporary Western readers. Their expertise enables identification of passages that require special attention during restoration, as well as assessment of textual variants that could affect interpretation of important philosophical or scientific concepts. The restoration process produces detailed documentation that records the condition of each manuscript upon arrival, the treatments applied during conservation work, and the final state achieved through careful intervention. This information supports future conservation efforts while providing evidence about the effectiveness of different treatment methods. The workshop coordinates with copyists who produce duplicate texts that enable scholarly use while protecting original manuscripts from damage that would result from frequent handling. These copies maintain fidelity to original formatting and textual variants, while using materials and techniques that ensure long-term preservation of the reproduced content. Lorenzo's correspondence chamber houses the cipher master's calculations, where new codes protect diplomatic and scholarly communications that require security measures beyond those provided by conventional diplomatic protocols. The development of these codes involves mathematical principles that ensure messages remain unintelligible to unauthorized readers while remaining accessible to intended recipients. The cipher wheels and mathematical tables spread across the workspace represent months of calculation designed to create encoding systems that resist decryption attempts by individuals lacking specific knowledge about the algorithms employed. Each system requires testing through practical application before implementation in actual correspondence, as theoretical security must translate into reliable protection under real-world conditions. The diplomatic seals visible among these materials indicate coordination with official channels that handle routine diplomatic communications. However, the coded messages developed here serve purposes that extend beyond standard diplomatic protocols, supporting negotiations and scholarly exchanges that require additional security measures. The mathematical foundations underlying these cipher systems draw upon classical sources as well as contemporary developments in algebraic thinking. The calculations visible on scattered parchments demonstrate systematic exploration of numerical relationships that could provide the basis for encoding methods resistant to conventional decryption techniques. The correspondence requiring such protection includes communications with scholars in other Italian cities, diplomatic contacts in foreign courts, and commercial partners whose activities support palace operations. Each category of correspondence requires different security levels, as the consequences of interception vary according to the sensitivity of the information being transmitted. The cipher master maintains records that enable authorized recipients to decode messages without compromising the security of the encoding systems themselves. These records require their own protection measures, as their capture would eliminate the security provided by the cipher systems they document. The development of new codes proceeds according to schedules that anticipate changes in diplomatic situations or scholarly collaborations that might require enhanced security measures. This forward planning ensures that appropriate protection remains available for communications that support activities essential to the palace's various enterprises. In the private discussion chamber, the Platonic Academy's midnight session brings together philosophers whose intellectual discourse requires protection from observation by individuals who might misinterpret theoretical discussions as practical political planning. The circular arrangement of chairs enables conversation that includes all participants while maintaining the equality of intellectual contribution that characterizes genuine philosophical investigation. The scrolls and texts arranged around the chamber provide reference materials for discussions that range across classical sources, contemporary developments in natural philosophy, and theoretical questions about the relationship between individual virtue and social organization. These materials represent careful selection from the palace library's holdings, chosen to support investigation of specific philosophical problems rather than general scholarly display. The oil lamps positioned throughout the chamber provide illumination that enables extended discussion without creating the brightness that might attract attention from household members whose presence could inhibit free intellectual exchange. The lighting also contributes to an atmosphere conducive to contemplative thinking rather than rhetorical performance. The participants in these sessions include palace residents as well as visiting scholars whose presence in Florence serves purposes related to broader intellectual networks that connect Italian humanist centers. Their discussions address questions that require careful consideration of political implications, as theoretical positions about governance and social organization could be misunderstood as practical political advocacy. The topics under consideration during this particular session involve the relationship between classical political theory and contemporary Italian political realities. The philosophers examine whether principles derived from ancient sources provide useful guidance for understanding current diplomatic and commercial challenges, or whether changed circumstances require entirely new theoretical approaches. The discussion proceeds according to methods derived from classical sources, but adapted to accommodate contemporary intellectual developments. Participants present arguments based on textual analysis, logical reasoning, and empirical observation, while maintaining awareness that their conclusions might influence practical decisions made by individuals with political responsibilities. The chamber's design enables private conversation while providing acoustic properties that prevent eavesdropping from adjacent rooms. The thick walls and heavy door create an environment where sensitive discussions can proceed without concern about unintended disclosure of theoretical positions that might be misinterpreted as political commitments. The session continues past midnight, as the participants recognize that their investigation addresses questions requiring extended consideration rather than quick resolution. The ideas being explored could influence educational policies, diplomatic strategies, and commercial decisions that affect not only Florence but other Italian cities whose leaders maintain contact with Medici networks. The Academy's work represents intellectual activity that operates parallel to but separate from the palace's practical political and commercial enterprises, though the theoretical insights developed through these discussions occasionally provide perspectives that prove useful for understanding complex practical problems. This separation ensures that philosophical investigation proceeds according to its own logic rather than immediate political utility, while maintaining connections that enable theoretical insights to inform practical wisdom when appropriate circumstances arise. As the night advances, these various chambers continue their quiet work, each contributing to enterprises that extend far beyond the palace walls into networks that connect Florence with intellectual and commercial centers across Europe and beyond. The hidden libraries preserve knowledge that shapes contemporary understanding, while the alchemy labs develop techniques that serve both practical and theoretical purposes. Together, they represent the infrastructure that enables a single family to influence the development of European civilization through careful cultivation of intellectual resources and strategic deployment of accumulated knowledge. The stone furnace breathes steadily in the deepest chamber, its coals glowing amber against blackened walls where ceramic vessels rest in careful arrangement. Here, where few footsteps ever echo, the most patient work of the night continues. Temperature requires constant attention, the kind of vigilance that transforms simple heating into precise art. The furnace keeper moves between bellows and vessels with practiced economy, adjusting airflow to maintain the steady heat that certain processes demand. These are not the dramatic flames that illuminate manuscripts or warm reading chambers above, but the controlled fire that enables transformation over hours, sometimes days. The ceramic containers hold materials that must be heated gradually, cooled slowly, their contents changing in ways that require both theoretical understanding and accumulated experience. Records from Renaissance workshops document such careful attention to temperature control, particularly in the preparation of medicinal compounds and the refinement of materials used in artistic endeavors. The Medici patronage of both medical practitioners and artists created context where such technical knowledge could develop alongside theoretical investigation. Here in this deep chamber, that intersection becomes tangible through the careful maintenance of conditions that enable both practical preparation and experimental inquiry. The furnace keeper checks the color of the coals, adjusting the bellows with movements that suggest years of practice. Each vessel contains materials at different stages of preparation, some requiring steady heat for hours, others needing gradual cooling that must proceed without interruption. The timing of these processes creates its own rhythm, separate from the scholarly work proceeding in chambers above, yet connected through the broader enterprise that encompasses both theoretical investigation and practical application. Smoke rises through carefully designed channels that carry it away from the working areas, while maintaining the controlled environment that these processes require. The engineering of such systems represents accumulated knowledge about managing fire and airflow, techniques that serve both immediate practical needs and longer-term experimental goals. The placement of this chamber deep within the palace structure provides both the isolation necessary for such work and the security that protects valuable materials and processes from unwanted observation. The ceramic vessels themselves tell stories of careful selection and preparation. Different materials require different containers, each chosen for its ability to withstand particular temperatures and chemical environments. The shapes and sizes reflect accumulated understanding about how heat distributes through different forms, knowledge gained through countless hours of careful observation and systematic testing. Some vessels show the wear of repeated use, while others appear newer, suggesting ongoing experimentation with different approaches and materials. As the night progresses, the furnace keeper maintains detailed awareness of each process, knowing which vessels will require attention at specific intervals and which can continue without intervention until morning. This knowledge represents the intersection of theoretical understanding and practical experience, the kind of accumulated wisdom that enables complex operations to proceed smoothly even in the quiet hours when other palace activities have ceased. The controlled environment of this chamber enables work that would be impossible under other circumstances. The steady temperature, the isolation from interruption, the careful arrangement of materials and tools create conditions where both established procedures and experimental investigations can proceed according to their own requirements rather than external pressures. Here, the patient work of transformation continues according to natural processes rather than human schedules. Through the narrow windows high above, the first suggestion of dawn begins to touch the eastern sky. The light remains faint, barely visible against the glow of the furnace, but it marks the approaching transition from night's private work to morning's public activities. Yet the processes continuing in these vessels cannot be hurried or interrupted, creating a continuity that extends beyond the rhythms of daily palace life. The furnace keeper notes the advancing hour while maintaining attention to the immediate requirements of temperature control. Some processes will continue through the morning and into the following day, requiring coordination with others who will assume responsibility as the palace awakens to its public functions. This transition requires careful documentation of current conditions and precise instructions for maintaining the delicate balance that these transformations demand. The materials being processed represent months of preparation, from the initial acquisition of rare substances through their preliminary refinement to this stage of careful heating. Each step has required specific knowledge and careful attention, creating value that extends far beyond the immediate costs of materials and labor. The knowledge gained through these processes contributes to understanding that serves both immediate practical needs and longer-term theoretical investigations. In other chambers throughout the palace, similar transitions begin as the approaching dawn signals the end of night's private activities. The eastern windows that face toward the Arno catch the first pale light, creating gentle illumination that gradually replaces the warmer glow of candles and oil lamps that have provided light throughout the night hours. From these windows, the view extends across Florence's rooftops toward the hills beyond, where other estates and workshops begin their own daily activities. The connection between the palace and the broader city becomes visible in this early light, reminding observers that the work proceeding within these walls serves purposes that extend throughout the region and beyond. The knowledge preserved and developed here influences activities in workshops, schools, and trading establishments throughout the network of relationships that the Medici have cultivated over generations. The approaching dawn requires careful attention to securing the materials and knowledge that have been the focus of night's activities. In chambers throughout the palace, scholars and practitioners begin the process of ensuring that sensitive materials are properly stored and that records of the night's work are secured against unwanted observation. This transition from active investigation to careful concealment requires its own forms of knowledge and systematic attention to detail. Wooden chests with complex locking mechanisms receive manuscripts that contain theoretical insights and practical observations developed during the night hours. The keys to these containers represent access to knowledge that could influence commercial, political, and intellectual developments throughout Europe. The responsibility for securing such materials requires both technical understanding of preservation methods and strategic awareness of which information must remain confidential and which can be shared through appropriate channels. The process of securing documents involves more than simple storage. Different materials require different environmental conditions, and the preservation of knowledge over time demands systematic attention to factors like humidity, temperature, and protection from light. The wooden chests themselves represent accumulated understanding about long-term preservation, their construction reflecting techniques developed through centuries of experience with protecting valuable materials from deterioration and unauthorized access. Some documents receive additional protection through encoding methods that ensure their contents remain accessible only to those with appropriate knowledge. These techniques range from simple substitution systems to more complex approaches that require specific keys or reference materials for decoding. The development and application of such methods represents another intersection between theoretical understanding and practical security needs, creating systems that protect valuable knowledge while enabling its transmission to authorized recipients. The careful arrangement of materials within storage containers reflects systematic organization that enables efficient retrieval while maintaining security. Each document has its designated location, marked through systems that provide access to authorized users while concealing the nature and importance of contents from casual observation. This organization requires ongoing maintenance and periodic updating as collections grow and as changing circumstances alter the relative importance of different materials. The keys themselves represent a crucial element in these security systems. Their distribution among trusted individuals creates networks of access that can adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining protection for sensitive materials. The physical design of locks and keys reflects accumulated understanding about mechanical security, while the social systems that govern their use represent equally sophisticated approaches to managing access to valuable knowledge. In Ficino's private chamber, the final documentation of the knight's philosophical investigations receives careful attention. The leather-bound journal that serves as his primary record contains observations and insights developed through hours of careful study and reflection. The process of recording these thoughts requires its own form of discipline, transforming the fluid development of ideas into permanent form that can serve future investigation and support ongoing theoretical work. The act of writing itself becomes a form of contemplation, requiring the scholar to examine ideas that emerge during active investigation and to organize them in ways that preserve their essential insights while making them accessible for future reference. This process often reveals connections and implications that were not immediately apparent during the initial development of concepts, creating additional value through the careful attention that permanent recording demands. The choice of language for these records reflects strategic considerations about audience and preservation. Some observations receive documentation in Latin, ensuring their accessibility to scholars throughout Europe, while others are recorded in the vernacular, making them available to local practitioners who might apply theoretical insights to practical problems. The decision about which language to use for specific observations represents ongoing assessment of how knowledge can best serve different purposes and reach appropriate audiences. The physical process of writing with quill and ink requires its own forms of attention and skill. The preparation of writing materials, the maintenance of proper consistency in the ink, the management of the writing surface all contribute to the quality and longevity of the resulting documents. These technical considerations become part of the broader enterprise of knowledge preservation, ensuring that insights developed through careful investigation remain accessible for future use. The organization of notes within the journal follows systems that enable efficient retrieval while protecting sensitive information from casual observation. Cross-references connect related observations, while marginal notations provide additional context and suggest connections to other sources. The development of such organizational systems represents accumulated understanding about how to manage complex information in ways that support both current work and future investigation. As dawn light strengthens, The transition from night's private activities to morning's public functions requires careful coordination throughout the palace. Servants begin their daily routines, moving through corridors and chambers that must show no obvious signs of the scholarly and experimental activities that have occupied the night hours. This transformation requires systematic attention to returning public spaces to their expected appearance, while ensuring that private work areas remain secure. The courtyard of the Palazzo Medici Riccardi receives the morning sun as servants arrive to begin daily cleaning and maintenance activities. Their movements follow established routines that maintain the palace's public appearance while respecting the privacy requirements of ongoing scholarly and commercial work. The coordination of these activities requires understanding of both practical maintenance needs and the security requirements that protect sensitive operations. The sounds of morning activity create a gentle rhythm that marks the transition from night's quiet concentration to day's more varied demands. Footsteps on stone floors, the movement of cleaning tools, the quiet conversations of staff members beginning their daily responsibilities all contribute to the atmosphere of a great household, awakening to its public functions. Yet beneath this surface activity, the more private work of the palace continues according to its own requirements and schedules. The architectural features that enable night's private activities remain hidden within the palace's public appearance. The concealed passages, the secured chambers, the carefully designed storage areas all maintain their functions while presenting no obvious signs of their existence to casual observers. This integration of public and private functions represents sophisticated understanding of how to manage complex operations within the constraints of social and political visibility. The morning light reveals the palace as others see it, a center of commercial and political activity, a showcase of artistic patronage, a symbol of family prosperity and social position. Yet those who have participated in night's activities carry knowledge of the additional functions that this same structure serves, understanding that extends beyond the visible evidence to encompass the networks of intellectual and practical activity that operate within and through these walls. The knowledge developed and preserved through night's activities will influence the day's public functions in ways that remain largely invisible to outside observers. Commercial decisions may reflect theoretical insights developed in private study. Artistic commissions may incorporate techniques refined in experimental laboratories. Political strategies may draw upon historical understanding preserved in hidden libraries. The integration of private knowledge with public action represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of how intellectual resources serve practical purposes. The cycle that begins again with each sunset ensures the continuity of this enterprise across generations. The methods developed for preserving and transmitting knowledge create systems that can adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential functions. The careful balance between security and accessibility enables valuable insights to serve appropriate purposes while protecting them from misuse or premature disclosure. As the morning sun climbs higher above Florence's rooftops, the palace settles into its daily rhythm, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of countless nights of careful investigation. The hidden chambers remain ready for evening's return to private work, their contents secure and their purposes unchanged by the transition to public activities. In the quiet corners where few venture, perhaps even in the distant chambers of places like Topkapi, similar cycles of concealment and revelation continue their ancient dance between knowledge and power, between the pursuit of understanding and the practical requirements of influence in a world where information itself has become the most valuable currency of all. The morning activities continue their predictable patterns, while the concealed chambers maintain their patient stillness. In the library above the bustling courtyard, a single candle remains burning on Ficino's desk, its flame steady in the motionless air. The wax has pooled around its base during the long hours of translation work, creating small rivers of hardened amber that catch the growing daylight from the narrow window. This final flame guards the completed pages of Plato's Republic, their Latin characters still glistening with fresh ink where certain passages received particular attention during the night's careful rendering. The manuscript lies open to a section discussing the philosopher king's education, its margins filled with Ficino's minute annotations connecting Platonic ideals to contemporary Florentine governance. His handwriting grows smaller and more precise as the commentary deepens, creating layers of interpretation that transform the ancient Greek wisdom into practical guidance for Lorenzo's administration. The candle's light illuminates these interconnected thoughts, revealing how classical philosophy serves present purposes through careful adaptation and application. Near the window, morning shadows begin their slow retreat across the reading desk, where several volumes remain chained to their posts. These secured books contain the most sensitive materials from the recent acquisitions, texts on natural philosophy that challenge certain established doctrines, mathematical treatises that suggest new approaches to navigation and engineering, and historical accounts that present alternative perspectives on recent political events. The chains ensure their availability to authorized readers, while preventing unauthorized removal or copying that might compromise their careful integration into the palace's intellectual framework. The growing daylight reveals details invisible during the night's concentrated study sessions. Dust motes dance in the strengthening sunbeams, settling on surfaces that show the subtle evidence of nocturnal activity. A magnifying lens rests beside an astronomical calculation, its polished surface reflecting the candle flame in miniature. Ink stains mark the desk's worn wood where centuries of scholars have pursued similar investigations, their accumulated traces creating a palimpsest of intellectual endeavor that connects present work to historical precedent. Below in the laboratory chambers, the alchemical apparatus maintains its own quiet presence as the equipment cools from the night's experimental sessions. The great alembic stands silent, its copper surface still warm from the distillation processes that concluded before dawn. Residual heat radiates from the metal, creating gentle air currents that carry the lingering scents of rose water and dissolved minerals through the underground rooms. The glass vessels arranged around the central apparatus contain the night's products, clear essences, crystalline precipitates, and purified extracts that await further analysis and application. A cabinet against the stone wall houses the raw materials for these investigations, its wooden doors secured with brass latches that protect hundreds of carefully labeled containers. Each small vessel holds substances gathered from across the known world, cinnabar from Spanish mines, pearls dissolved in vinegar from Persian merchants, antimony from German traders, and rare earths collected during diplomatic missions to distant courts. The systematic organization reflects years of accumulated knowledge about which combinations produce desired effects and which require particular precautions during handling and processing. The furnace room maintains its warmth through thick stone walls designed to contain and distribute heat evenly throughout the experimental chambers. Ceramic vessels line shelves built into the masonry, their glazed surfaces bearing the subtle discoloration that indicates repeated exposure to controlled temperature variations. These containers hold materials undergoing long-term transformation processes, metals slowly changing their essential properties, plant extracts concentrating through gradual evaporation, and chemical preparations that require weeks or months of patient attention to achieve their final forms. The careful documentation of these processes fills leather-bound ledgers stacked on a nearby table, their pages recording precise measurements, timing sequences, and observed results that enable successful repetition of effective procedures. Giovanni's meticulous handwriting tracks the relationships between different approaches, noting which variations produce superior outcomes and which combinations should be avoided due to dangerous or unpredictable reactions. This accumulated expertise represents decades of systematic investigation, transforming empirical observation into reliable methodology. The herb garden visible through the laboratory's small windows shows the effects of the night's cultivation activities. Freshly watered beds display the careful attention given to specimens that require specific growing conditions to develop their medicinal properties. Rare plants from distant regions receive protection under glass covers that maintain appropriate humidity levels, while native species grow in arrangements that optimize their mutual beneficial effects. The systematic cultivation ensures steady supplies of materials essential for both medical treatments and experimental investigations. Stone pathways between the planted beds show the wear patterns created by regular nocturnal tending, their surfaces polished smooth by decades of careful footsteps carrying water, tools, and harvested materials between the garden and the processing chambers. The geometric layout reflects principles derived from classical agricultural texts, adapted to accommodate the specific requirements of plants whose properties serve multiple purposes within the palace's various intellectual and practical enterprises. The courtyard above begins to show signs of the approaching change from night's private activities to day's public functions. Servants move quietly through the arcaded walkways, their soft-soled shoes creating minimal disturbance as they prepare for the morning's official business. The transition occurs gradually, allowing time for the secure storage of sensitive materials and the careful concealment of evidence from the night's investigations. Each element of this routine has been refined through years of practice, ensuring that no detail compromises the discretion essential to the palace's dual existence. The eastern sky continues its steady brightening, casting longer shadows across the courtyard's geometric patterns while highlighting the architectural details that serve both decorative and functional purposes. Hidden ventilation systems built into the ornamental stonework provide fresh air to the underground chambers, while decorative elements conceal observation points that enable discreet monitoring of the courtyard's activities. The apparent simplicity of the Renaissance design masks sophisticated engineering that supports the complex requirements of the palace's multiple functions. In the upper chambers, Lorenzo's astronomical instruments await the next evening's observations, their brass surfaces reflecting the growing daylight that makes stellar observation impossible until darkness returns. Star charts rolled and secured in protective cases contain the accumulated data from recent months of systematic sky watching, their careful notations tracking planetary movements and celestial events that influence both agricultural planning and diplomatic timing. The cyclical nature of these observations connects the palace's activities to cosmic rhythms that extend far beyond human political concerns. The transition from night to day requires the careful securing of materials and equipment that cannot be exposed to casual observation or unauthorized access. Sensitive documents return to hidden compartments built into the palace's walls, their locations known only to trusted individuals who understand the importance of maintaining strict security protocols. The systematic concealment ensures that each night's investigations can resume without interruption, while protecting the accumulated knowledge from those who might misuse or misinterpret its significance. The morning light gradually fills spaces that hosted the night's concentrated intellectual work, transforming chambers of investigation into apparently ordinary rooms that serve conventional palace functions. The dual nature of these spaces enables the continuous pursuit of knowledge, while maintaining the public facade necessary for effective political operation. This careful balance between revelation and concealment has enabled the Medici family to accumulate and apply wisdom that extends far beyond the apparent scope of their official responsibilities. The servants' activities increase as the palace prepares for the day's scheduled meetings and ceremonial obligations, their movements following established patterns that avoid areas where sensitive materials require additional time for proper storage. The coordination between different aspects of the palace's operations reflects years of careful planning and discreet communication that ensures all elements of the complex enterprise function smoothly without compromising security or effectiveness. The candle in Ficino's study burns lower, its flame growing smaller as the wax reaches its final reserves. The steady light continues to illuminate the completed translation work, creating a bridge between the night's scholarly concentration and the day's practical applications. The philosophical insights captured during the dark hours will influence decisions made in daylight meetings, though their origins will remain concealed within the broader context of Lorenzo's political wisdom and cultural sophistication. As the flame finally gutters and extinguishes itself, the morning sun provides sufficient illumination for the day's activities, marking the completion of another cycle in the palace's endless rhythm of investigation and application. The knowledge gained during the night's work joins the vast accumulation of wisdom that guides the Medici family's ongoing influence over Florence's cultural and political development. The hidden chambers rest quietly, their contents secure and their purposes fulfilled, ready to resume their essential functions when darkness returns. The courtyard fills with the sounds of normal daily activity as the palace transforms once again into its public identity, carrying forward the benefits of the night's private investigations while maintaining the discreet separation that protects both the knowledge and those who pursue it. In the growing warmth of the morning sun, Florence awakens to another day shaped by wisdom gathered in darkness, its citizens unaware of the careful work that continues to influence their lives through channels as invisible as they are essential. The rhythm of concealment and revelation continues its ancient pattern, ensuring that knowledge serves its proper purposes while remaining protected from those who lack the wisdom to use it responsibly. In the quiet spaces where few venture, the accumulated insights of countless nights of patient investigation await the return of darkness and the renewal of the endless quest for understanding that connects human curiosity to the deeper mysteries that govern both earthly affairs and celestial movements. The palace settles into its daytime stillness, its hidden chambers holding their secrets with the same patient discretion that has protected valuable knowledge through centuries of political change and cultural transformation. The work continues as it must, bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and present necessity, between the pursuit of truth and the practical requirements of power, between the individual quest for understanding and the collective need for guidance in navigating the complexities of human existence. Now, in this moment between night's private revelations and day's public responsibilities, there comes a gentle invitation to rest. The accumulated wisdom of centuries whispers that some knowledge comes not through active seeking, but through the quiet receptivity that sleep provides. The candle has completed its vigil, the laboratory apparatus cools in patient stillness, and the garden rests under morning's protective light. Allow your breathing to follow the rhythm of the palace's own quiet settling, each exhale carrying away the need to understand everything immediately, each inhale bringing the peaceful certainty that knowledge will be there when you need it. The Medici chambers keep their secrets safe while you rest, their hidden doors remaining closed until curiosity calls you back to exploration. Sleep comes naturally in such protected spaces, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of those who understood that rest itself is a form of investigation, a way of allowing insights to settle into understanding without the effort of active pursuit. The morning light grows warmer as your eyes grow heavy, the palace's ancient stones holding both secrets and sleepers in their patient embrace.